Hello, my amazing audience and subscribers. Welcome to episode 3 of Seoul Vendetta. If you haven't watched the previous episodes yet, make sure to check them out before watching this one. Now, let's dive right into it. The night stretched long and heavy as Jihoon's car sped through the deserted streets of Seoul. Red lights flickered across the windshield, vanishing into the blur of motion. His hand pressed tightly against the towel on Natalia's side, where blood seeped through in dark, stubborn waves. She was slumped against the seat, her skin pale under the dim dashboard glow, her head lolling weakly with every turn. By the time Jihoon reached his compound, his men were already waiting. Without a word, he stepped out, lifted her into his arms, and stormed through the open doors. Dr. Han, a middle-aged man with steady hands and sharp eyes, met him halfway. "She's lost a lot of blood," the doctor said, his tone brisk but controlled. "We need to operate immediately." Jihoon gave a short nod and stepped aside, his shirt soaked crimson, though he hardly noticed. Hours crawled by like centuries. Jihoon paced the corridor, his mind a storm. He had seen death countless times, but watching her hover so close to it felt different. Every faint sound from inside made his pulse quicken. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Han emerged, fatigue etched into his features. He peeled off his gloves and exhaled deeply. "She's stable," he said. "The bullet missed any vital organs. She needs rest, but she's going to make it." For the first time in hours, Jihoon's shoulders eased. When he entered the room, the lights were soft, the air tinged with antiseptic. Natalia lay still on the bed, her breathing shallow but steady. Jihoon approached quietly, each step measured. He stood beside her, silent, watching the fragile rise and fall of her chest, proof that she was still alive. Gently, he reached out and took her hand, his fingers brushing her cool skin. The touch stirred something deep inside him. Unfamiliar, unwanted, yet inescapable. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here." He stayed like that for a long moment. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the silence. Then, with a quiet sigh, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. A gesture so unlike him it almost startled him. Straightening, he lingered a moment longer, his gaze fixed on her sleeping face. At the doorway, he paused, his voice low, almost to himself. "Don't make me worry again." Then he turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Jihoon had barely taken 3 steps when his assistant walked towards him, urgency stitched into every movement. "Sir," the man began without preamble, "it was Zhao Hyunsik who paid the assassins to kill Natalia. Madam Park made sure the Prime Minister appointed Hyunsik's son, Miho, as the National Chief of Police. Since she fulfilled her end of the deal, Hyunsik had to do his." Jihoon's jaw tightened, a hard line forming across his face, the only visible crack in his composure. He had not expected Mrs. Park to be aligning herself with anyone, least of all Zhao Hyunsik. The corridor was silent for a beat before his assistant spoke again. "There's more," the assistant continued, his voice lower now. "Mr. Ontamin, the acting shareholder you placed in Madam Park's company, was nearly killed tonight. Our men intervened just in time. The hit was messy. Intel suggests Mrs. Park ordered it. It's her 3rd attempt on him." Jihoon didn't flinch. The idea of Madam Park striking out so boldly didn't surprise him. What unsettled him was the scale of her ambition. She was no longer afraid, and that made her dangerous. "Sir," the assistant ventured carefully, "do you want us to strike back?" For a moment, Jihoon said nothing. Then, in a voice cold and measured, he answered, "No. Mrs. Park's background is complicated. She's connected to things we don't interfere with. Not until we know exactly what we're dealing with." A breath of relief passed through the assistant, though he masked it quickly. "And Hyunsik?" Jihoon's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible line. Something that might have been a smile if not for the chill in his eyes. "Leave Hyunsik to Lee." He glanced down the corridor toward the faint sliver of light seeping from Natalia's room, his tone like steel. "If Hyunsik makes a move against his own people, Lee will handle it. He knows what to do, and he won't hesitate." The assistant bowed his head, a flicker of pride and unease crossing his face. "Understood, sir." Jihoon gave a single curt nod, the conversation ending as abruptly as it began. His assistant turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jihoon standing alone in the dim corridor. In the dim-lit study of Zhao Hyunsik's mansion, Hyunsik sat behind his massive desk, his sharp eyes fixed on the trembling man before him. The assistant's hands fidgeted as he spoke, his voice unsteady. "Sir, the assassins failed. Natalia is still alive." Hyunsik didn't respond at once. He leaned back in his leather chair. Failed, he repeated, the single word laced with venom. Yes, sir, the assistant said quickly. They were about to take her out, but someone intervened. It wasn't Adrian Lee. That caught Hyunsik's attention. His eyes lifted, cold and assessing. Not Lee, he asked softly, too softly. The assistant shook his head, lowering his gaze. No, sir. We're still trying to identify who stepped in. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Hyunsik exhaled slowly and waved a dismissive hand. Get out. The assistant bowed deeply, and he hurriedly left the room. The door clicked shut behind him. Hyunsik's composed mask cracked, just enough for a quiet curse to slip through his teeth. He reached for the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. The line rang once before a cold, clipped voice answered. Hyunsik. Mrs. Park, he said evenly, though irritation simmered beneath. We have a problem. I already know, she cut in, her voice sharp with disdain. The assassins failed. Hyunsik's grip on the phone tightened. It wasn't as simple as. Simple? She interrupted, a bitter laugh slicing through the line. She's just one woman, Hyunsik. One. And you, a man who calls himself a mafia boss, couldn't get rid of her? Pathetic. His jaw flexed, anger flashing in his eyes, but his tone remained controlled. Someone helped her, he said tightly. It wasn't Lee, but someone else was there. They interfered before my men could finish it. We're still working to identify them. There was a pause, a short, dangerous silence. Then Mrs. Park spoke again, her words low and deliberate. Then find out who it was. I don't care how. I want the names, and I want both their heads, hers and the one who helped her, before the week ends. Do I make myself clear? Hyunsik's reply was flat, his voice void of emotion. Understood. Good, she said coldly, and hung up. He placed his phone down, his reflection staring back at him from the polished surface of the desk. Outwardly calm, inwardly seething. For a long moment, he sat there in silence. Then he reached for a bottle, poured himself a drink, and watched the amber liquid swirl in the glass. He raised it halfway, paused, and muttered under his breath. Not Lee, then who? Outside, the night stretched on, thick, restless, and heavy with the promise of blood. The living room of Mrs. Park that night smelled of polished wood and lilies, a fragile civility she wore like armor. She sat on the long sofa, a portrait of composed power. A cooling cup of tea sat on the low table before her. She sat there as she thought about Hyunsik failing to kill Natalia when Hyunwoo slipped through the front door, jacket loose, his gait casual in the entitled way of youth. His arrival made no sound against the hush, but it drew an assessing look from his mother. She did not rise. She watched him as if measuring his bones for failure. Why are you coming home late? She asked, a blade wrapped in velvet. He shrugged, a rehearsed smile already forming until he met the expression on her face. I was with friends at a club, he said, expecting the easy dismissal afforded to a son who'd never been held to account. For a heartbeat, something like amusement flickered across Mrs. Park's features. A private laugh that never reached her eyes. Then she stood, every motion practiced and precise, and crossed the room with the deliberate elegance of someone who owned the space she occupied. When she reached him, the movement was sudden and sure. Her palm rose and struck his cheek with the force of a verdict. He blinked, stunned, the laughter evaporated. Her hand closed on his jaw and held it there with a grip that offered no tenderness. Up close, her face was all cold precision. Do you know what I hate, my son? She said, each word measured. I hate liars. Hyunwoo swallowed. His easy bravado had vanished. He opened his mouth to protest, to smooth the moment with some practiced excuse, but Mrs. Park gave him no room. I told you to let her go, she continued. I fired that woman from the company because she distracted you from your purpose, and yet you sought her out tonight after I warned you. He tried to speak. The sentence that came out, I love her, sounded more like a plea than a defense. It did not soften her. In this house, affection was never an argument, it was leverage. If you go near her again, Mrs. Park said, her voice colder now, I will make sure she dies. She released his jaw with the finality of a judge passing sentence and turned toward the doorway. At the threshold she paused, without looking back, and left him with one last cold instruction. Concentrate on your work in the company, Hyunwoo. Fail to secure the board's approval, and you will receive none of your father's wealth or properties. Hyunwoo stood frozen in the dim living room, reeling, not just from the slap, but from the absolute clarity of what his mother had just promised. That same night, Adrian sat alone in his study, the city's late light slicing through the blinds in hard, horizontal lines. The silence broke when his assistant stepped in, quiet, efficient, the way men who worked for Adrian always moved, and spoke without preface. "Boss, Hyunsik sent men to kill Natalia tonight." The words landed like a fist. Adrian did not respond at once. He turned his face toward the window. The hard angle of his jaw caught the light. His long, careful hands folded together on the desk, as if trying to contain the news. The assistant went on. "She fought, sir. She killed most of them, but she was hit. Park Jihoon and his men arrived in time and took her away. She's alive." Adrian then spoke, his voice low and steady, like a blade being drawn. "When Zhao Wubin descends from that plane tomorrow morning, make sure he doesn't make it off the tarmac alive." The assistant's face flickered with surprise, then the swift calculation of cost. "This is Hyunsik's punishment for touching what's mine," Adrian added. He then stood and crossed to the bar. There, he poured himself a drink he did not intend to touch, then turned back to the man who waited. "As for Jihoon," he said, each syllable measured, "I will go to his base tomorrow. You can go." The assistant bowed and left. When the door clicked shut, Adrian drank his drink as he watched the city below. The morning light spilled over the vast estate of Park Jihoon, bathing the driveway in gold as Adrian Lee's sleek black car rolled to a stop before the mansion. Jihoon stood waiting at the entrance, hands in his pockets, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. "You're early, Lee," he said, his tone light but edged with meaning. "I didn't think the great Adrian Lee ever visited anyone before breakfast." Adrian stepped out of the car, straightening his jacket as he approached, each stride deliberate, his dark eyes steady. "Well," he said smoothly, a ghost of a smile curving his lips, "she's my favorite person in the world, Jihoon. I couldn't exactly wait, could I? Now tell me, where is she?" Jihoon studied him for a moment before replying calmly, "She's resting. Still unconscious. Dr. Han said she lost a lot of blood. I'll take her with me," Adrian said immediately, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "She's my employee, after all." Jihoon gave a small, humorless laugh. "Your employee? She nearly died because you failed to protect her, Lee. She's safer here than anywhere near you right now." Adrian's smirk vanished, his jaw tightening. "Watch your words, Jihoon." Jihoon didn't flinch. After a long pause, he turned, gesturing for Adrian to follow. "Come inside," he said quietly. "You should see her for yourself." The two men walked through the long corridors of the mansion, their footsteps echoing against polished marble. The air carried the faint scent of disinfectant, blending with the early warmth of morning. When they reached the end of the hallway, Jihoon stopped before a door and opened it gently. Inside, the room was dim and still. Natalia lay on the bed, her skin pale against the white sheets, her dark hair fanned loosely around her face. Adrian froze in the doorway. For the first time in years, something flickered in his eyes, an emotion that wasn't calculation or control. It burned for a heartbeat, then vanished behind the steel mask he wore so well. He stepped closer, his gaze locked on her face, tracing every fragile breath as if afraid she might disappear if he blinked. Jihoon watched him silently, arms folded. After a moment, he spoke, voice low and steady. "You didn't bother to find out who she really was, or what she's been through. All you cared about was what she could do for you. Her skill, her precision behind the wheel." Adrian said nothing. His eyes never left Natalia. For once, the man who always had a response, always had control, stood in silence, his composure cracking just enough for regret to slip through. The quiet stretched between them until Jihoon turned slightly, glancing toward the window. Finally, Adrian spoke, his voice quiet but edged with something dangerous. "You could have helped her. You could have given her what she wanted, revenge against Mrs. Park and her son. But you didn't. Why?" Jihoon's gaze shifted back to him. "It's a long story," he said simply, his tone unreadable. Then he gestured toward the door. "Come. There are things you should hear, but not here." Adrian looked at Natalia one last time before he turned and followed Jihoon out. 5 minutes later, they were in Jihoon's study. Adrian moved to the bar without hesitation, poured himself a measure of amber liquor, and settled into a chair with the casual arrogance that had become part of him. Jihoon watched him with a quiet, almost fond chuckle and meeting Lee's gaze. "So, Jihoon, start talking," Lee said, glass tipped just so, a smile that carried a challenge. Jihoon leaned forward, voice low and steady, and began to unravel what years of patient digging had revealed. Madam Park's reach isn't just wealth and connections. It's a web that stretches beyond national borders. Shell corporations, anonymous trusts, and international organizations so deep and dangerous that even governments and task forces keep their distance. Adrian's smirk sharpened into focused interest as he listened. "What if we work together?" he said after a moment, voice cool with calculation. "With DeLuca. We take her network down together." Jihoon weighed the proposal like a man considering an explosion. "Possible," he said at last, "but it must be surgical. Too many eyes must remain blind to the true aim." Adrian's smile widened into satisfied confidence. "Good," he replied, rising and moving toward the door as if already claiming the outcome. At the doorway, Jihoon stopped him with one last precision-cut question. "Lee, are you really interested in Natalia?" The question hung in the air like a loaded chamber. Adrian's reply was a smirk that said more than words could. A few minutes later, the door to Jihoon's study opened quietly. His assistant stepped in, his expression careful, eyes searching his boss's face before he spoke. "Sir, do you really trust Lee, especially now that he's taken Natalia away?" Jihoon leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly as his gaze drifted toward the decanter of untouched whiskey on the table, the golden liquid catching the faint light. "Yes," he said finally, his voice calm but certain. "I trust him. Lee protects his people, so long as they remain loyal to him, Hanol. It's his code, twisted as it may be." He paused, a faint, knowing smile tugging at his lips as he glanced toward the door Adrian had walked through not long ago. "As for Natalia, I think he's interested in her. And because of that, he'll protect her with everything he has." Hanol bowed his head slightly, accepting his words in silence, then turned to leave. Alone again, Jihoon sat in the stillness, his thoughts unreadable. That same morning, the sun had barely crested the horizon over Incheon International Airport when Zhao Wubin stepped down from his private jet, tailored black suit and dark shades intact. His bodyguards flanked him as he adjusted his cufflinks, the easy confidence of a man who felt untouchable. "Make sure the car is ready," he said to one of his men, glancing at his phone. "Father wants me at the office within the hour. No delays." A guard acknowledged him through his earpiece as they moved toward the waiting black SUV. "Welcome back to Seoul, sir," another guard said, opening the door for Woo Bin. Before he could step inside, a single, sharp crack split the morning air, precise final. Woo Bin's phone slipped from his fingers as a bullet ripped through his chest. "Sir," someone cried, rushing forward. Hands scrambled to lift him into the SUV, blood darkening his shirt. Inside the car, a guard pressed a trembling hand to the wound. "Stay with us, boss. We'll get you to the hospital," he pleaded, voice breaking. Woo Bin's breathing was shallow. His lips moved without sound, vision sliding into haze. The convoy tore through the city as they headed to a nearby hospital. At the hospital, the staff rushed him into emergency. Outside, the head guard paced, muttering prayers he hardly heard. Minutes later, the doors opened and a doctor stepped out. His face was a closed book. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "He didn't make it." The bodyguards froze, disbelief carved into their features. One man clenched his fists until the knuckles went white and hissed through gritted teeth. "Mr. Zhao will burn this city when he hears this." 10 minutes later, the phone in Zhao Hyunsik's study rang like an alarm. Its single, shrill note cut clean through the heavy air and the scent of cigar smoke. He answered and listened without moving. Slowly, color drained from his face as the voice on the line spoke bluntly. His son had been shot on the tarmac and, rushed to the hospital, did not make it. The phone slipped from his hand. For a heartbeat, Hyunsik stood frozen. Then the room erupted. He smashed photos from the walls, hurled a crystal ashtray across the floor, and sent documents flying from the desk in a storm of paper and glass. When the thud of wreckage had finally faded, his hands worked with terrible, precise purpose. He snatched the phone back and dialed without hesitation. The line clicked once before Adrian Lee's voice came through, composed as ever. "Let me guess," Adrian said lightly, as if discussing the weather. "Is this an invitation to your son's funeral?" "I'm afraid I can't make it, Zhao." Rage detonated in Hyunsik's chest. He roared the name that had become his curse. "Why did you kill my son, you bastard?" he demanded, each word a blade. Adrian's reply was clinical, void of flinch. "You touched what belonged to me," Lee said. "You crossed a line." Hyunsik laughed, a raw, unbelieving sound. "She's just your driver," he spat. "A nobody." "Why, Lee? Tell me why you would sink this low." Adrian's voice softened, and the words that followed were dangerously intimate. "She is more than that now. She's someone I care about. She might even be someone I would want beside me, if she chose it." Hyunsik's voice snapped, animal and immediate. You killed my son. Do you understand what that means? I will do everything in my power to end you. The threat came from old blood and older grief. Adrian let the silence stretch, long enough to widen the point of the fear in it. When he spoke again, his tone was even terrible. You should be afraid. I wanted to make you suffer in ways that tasted sweeter than simple killing. But since you touched what was mine, I will make you pay for this, and for what you did to my family. You betrayed my parents and killed them and my sister. I will return what you did with interest. This is just the beginning. Then he hung up. For a moment the study seemed to contract around Hyunsik after the call. The accusation about Lee's dead family gnawed at him. He had never met Lee and had no idea why such a vendetta existed. After a long while of brooding and finding no answers, Hyunsik exhaled sharply and rubbed his temples. Just as he was about to summon his assistant, the door opened and the man stepped in. His eyes widened at the sight of the wrecked study, shards of glass glittering on the floor, torn papers scattered like snow. But he said nothing. Sir, the assistant began carefully, a man named Mr. Song is here to see you. He claims to be Adrian Lee's uncle and says he knows something about Mr. Lee that you don't. He's waiting in the meeting room. Hyunsik straightened slowly, expression unreadable. Tell the cleaners to fix this mess, he said in a low voice. Then, without another glance at the ruin, he stood and walked out, the assistant following close behind. In the meeting room, Mr. Song sat comfortably in a leather chair, his demeanor calm and politely measured. Hyunsik entered with deliberate steps and took the seat opposite him. You must be Mr. Song, Hyunsik said flatly. Start talking. Mr. Song's eyes glinted with something like malice braided with amusement. Tell me, Mr. Zhao, he began, conversational and cool. Have you ever wondered why Adrian Lee came after you the moment he arrived in Seoul? Hyunsik narrowed his gaze. What are you suggesting? He asked, voice low and dangerous. Mr. Song leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. You remember the Song family, don't you? The one you betrayed and destroyed after working with them for years. Hyunsik gave no sign of recognition. Silence stretched between them. Mr. Song's lips curved. They were Adrian Lee's parents, Zhao. The couple you turned on and had executed were his mother and father. For the first time, Hyunsik's composure flickered. That's impossible, he said quietly. When I entered the Song Empire, they had no son. That's because you never met him, Mr. Song replied smoothly. My brother sent his boy away before you came. Adrian grew up under the protection of the De Luca family in Italy. When he returned, it was for revenge, for the blood you spilled and the empire you destroyed. Hyunsik leaned back, eyes dark and thoughtful. So that's it, he muttered. The reason he's been at my throat since day one. Exactly, Mr. Song said with a grin. And that reason can be used to our advantage. Hyunsik's stare sharpened. What do you want, Mr. Song? The older man's expression hardened. I want him gone, he said plainly. My brother's empire should have been mine after his death, but that boy's alliance with De Luca kept me from it. They've sheltered him ever since. As long as Adrian breathes, I'll never have what's rightfully mine. A thin, almost predatory smile curved Hyunsik's lips. And you expect me to do your dirty work? I've offered you information you wouldn't have found on your own, Mr. Song countered. Hyunsik studied him a long moment, then sat back and said coolly, Consider it done. Mr. Song's grin widened. Satisfaction flickered in his eyes. He rose, adjusted his coat, and walked out of the room, leaving Hyunsik to the quiet aftermath of another alliance forged in blood. When his assistant cleared his throat and stepped inside, Hyunsik looked up with an expression edged like knives. Should I have him taken care of, sir? The assistant asked, voice careful as if testing cold water. Hyunsik's reply was almost casual, but it carried the weight of a verdict. No. Let Lee kill him. If Song wants the boy dead, he will taste the cost himself. The assistant's eyebrows rose in surprise, then fell into a tight line. Then what now? He asked. Hyunsik's mouth flattened. Make the funeral arrangements for Zhao Wubin. See to all the protocols. I want it swift and public. The assistant blinked, shock and disbelief warring across his face. Sir, what do you mean? What happened to the first young master? He demanded, incredulous. Hyunsik watched him for a long moment before answering, his words cold and precise. Lee had him taken out. He said it was payback for the attempt on his driver. The explanation landed like a stone in the assistant's stomach. Natalia is only a driver, he protested, incredulity and irritation mixing in his tone. She's nothing more than a hired hand. Hyunsik's eyes narrowed until they were slits. Lee told me she matters to him now, he said, voice low and dangerous. Mrs. Park was right, she's an opportunity. I didn't believe her at first, but now I do. If he values her, we can exploit that affection to reach him. For a long beat the assistant absorbed the calculation, then said bluntly, It won't be easy, sir. Our men we planted inside his circles were discovered and executed. Hyunsik nodded once, as if the news were an expected variable on a board he'd already mapped. Then we adapt, he murmured. He paused, then added, Have you discovered who helped her? The assistant shook his head. Not yet, sir. Keep digging, Hyunsik said, his gaze sharpening into a plan only he could see. The assistant bowed, then hesitated at the door. Anything else, sir? He asked. Hyunsik rose and walked toward him. For now go, he said. Prepare the papers for tomorrow. Public mourning will show strength. Let the city see a father's grief. His assistant inclined his head and left. Hyunsik remained alone in the meeting room, the silence pressing in as memories of his child surfaced, sharp, irreplaceable, and hot as fresh blood. The afternoon light that day filtered through the blinds in pale bands across the quiet room where Adrian sat, a book in hand, and the steady breathing of the machines the only other sound. He had been reading in the chair by the window when her voice, thin, surprised, cut the hush. I didn't know you read books on how to love a woman. I thought you'd read manuals on how to hide emotion when you kill your enemies. He set the book down with careful deliberation and pushed the chair closer until the space between them felt charged. How are you feeling? He asked, his tone softer than the steel that usually wrapped him. Okay, she murmured, throat dry. I just need some water. In less than a breath he was up and handing her a glass. She drank slowly, the liquid steadying her, and when she returned the cup their fingers brushed for a heartbeat, a touch that seemed to surprise them both. She looked at him then with something like wonder. Wasn't I supposed to be at Jihoon's place since he saved me? She asked. Adrian's smile was brief, edged with amusement. I told you yesterday you were mine, he said simply. And I meant it. Since you belong to me now, I have to be the one to take care of you. Besides, he didn't object when I took you. The admission hung in the air. She offered no answer, only a small, ambiguous expression that might have been acceptance or recollection. They sat in companionable silence for a few breaths before Natalia's voice returned, softer and searching. Why are you showing so much concern? I'm just an employee. Adrian's gaze did not waver. It was unusually honest. Because I think I've fallen for you, he said without pretense, the words clean and dangerous. The confession landed between them like a thing with weight. Natalia faltered, half laughing, half stammering. Lee, you. He rose then, drawn by an impulse she hadn't expected, and bent to press a quick kiss to her forehead. She stared at him afterward, stunned. The vulnerability in her eyes softened something in his face for a single breath. Get some sleep, beautiful, he murmured as he straightened, voice equal parts command and tenderness. You need to heal. When you're fit, the game begins. He paused at the doorway and looked back once more. Jihoon and I have partnered to help you get revenge on Mrs. Park. The two of us will meet with DeLuca to plan. But first, I will clear my enemies off the board so that I can focus on yours. Then he left the room. Adrian stepped into the living room, the quiet of the mansion stretching around him like a taut wire. He sank onto the sofa and flipped on the television. The screen's glow reflected sharply in his eyes. The news anchor's voice carried clearly through the room, smooth and professional. In breaking news, Zhao Wubin, son of Mr. Zhao Hyunsik and brother to the National Chief of Police, has passed away earlier today. His family reported the cause as sudden illness, and his funeral arrangements are scheduled for tomorrow morning. Adrian smirked as he watched the segment. A moment later, his assistant, Jihoon, entered quietly, bowing slightly at the doorway. Adrian didn't look away from the screen as he spoke. Jihoon, prepare everything. I will attend this funeral, whether they expect me or not. Jihoon nodded. Adrian turned slightly to lock eyes with him. I have to be there for my friend, and also offer my condolences. Losing a son, it's not easy. Don't you agree, Jihoon? Jihoon's shoulders relaxed, a small laugh escaping despite the situation. You are right, sir. It is never easy. He nodded firmly, a mixture of respect and amusement in his tone. I will see to it immediately. Everything will be ready before tomorrow morning. Adrian gave a sharp nod, his gaze flicking back to the television. Good. Jihoon bowed once more before leaving. Tomorrow morning would be interesting. That night, A sleek private jet touched down on the runway of Seoul International Airport, its silver exterior glinting under the floodlights. The hatch opened with a hiss, and a woman in her mid-20s stepped gracefully into the humid air. And every step she took down the stairs radiated confidence and purpose. Behind her, a man in a black suit, her assistant, Mr. Williams, followed closely, trailed by 3 bodyguards whose movements were sharp and disciplined. As they crossed the tarmac toward a waiting convoy of black cars, Mr. Williams quickened his pace until he was walking beside her. "Miss Catherine," he began carefully, his voice low but edged with worry, "don't you think you should reconsider this? You've been chasing Mr. Lee for years, and he's made it very clear he's not interested. He even warned you to stop." He hesitated before adding, "The last time you tried to touch him, he broke both your wrists. It took 3 months for you to recover." Catherine stopped walking, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She turned her head slowly, fixing him with an icy glare that silenced him at once. "You don't understand what it means to love someone, Mr. Williams," she said, her voice smooth but carrying a dangerous undertone. "Adrian Lee is not just a man I want. He's the only man I've ever truly desired. This time, I'm not giving up. I'll make him see me differently." Williams let out a slow breath, clearly unconvinced but too wise to argue further. "As you wish, Miss Catherine," he said quietly, opening the door of the waiting black car. Catherine slid into the back seat with the poise of a queen returning to her throne, her expression unreadable as the door closed behind her. Williams joined her, and the car pulled away from the airport, disappearing into the glittering Seoul night. As the city lights reflected off the tinted windows, Catherine stared out in silence, her blue eyes narrowing with resolve. "This time," she murmured to herself, "Adrian Lee won't escape me." Thank you so much for watching episode 3 of Seoul Vendetta. I truly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. See you in the next one.